The bell above the pharmacy doors sounded like a teaspoon tapping the rim of a teacup, bright, delicate, and out of place against the bruise-colored evening pressing its face to the glass. Rhea Calder felt the chime in her chest, the way she felt the hum of the refrigeration units that kept insulin cold and the steady click of the tablet counter that once soothed her like rain. Outside, the sky over Harrow's Crossing held that strange metallic light storms brought to the prairie, a flicker of furnace orange and wet slate giving the parking lot a shine like spilled mercury. She was alone behind the counter, the rest of her staff gone home early because the flu wave had finally broken and the day had been slow enough to hear her own breathing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The man who stepped inside carried the cold on his leather like a traveling bruise. He didn't so much walk as sway, gloved hands still on the door handle as if the world might tilt without that anchor. The jacket was cut long and black, shoulders beaded with rain. On the right breast a small patch, Rook, and beneath it a smaller bar that read Nomad. He coughed, a dry, cracking cough that seemed to splinter his ribs, and Rhea felt the reflexive tug of worry at the base of her skull the way she always did when a body said more than a mouth could. "Evening," she said, voice low, palms splayed on the counter as if she could push calm across the linoleum. "You okay to stand?" His eyes lifted, startlingly light, like ice and soot. He nodded, then shook his head almost immediately, embarrassment scuffing across his features. "Didn't want the ER. It's not that. Chest, fever. Been riding too long." His voice dragged like a boot sole over gravel. She came around the counter the way she came around hard truths, gently, as if something might break if she rushed. "I'm Rhea," she said. "Let's sit." She guided him to the blood pressure chair by the end cap of cough drops and disposable hot water bottles. The storm banged a loose sign outside, and the fluorescent lights overhead flickered, returned to steady. She slid a pulse oximeter over his index finger, avoiding the scabbed knuckles. The device blinked, then showed her numbers that made the back of her neck heat. Oxygen at 91%, heart rate a hammering 118. Fever put a sheen on his forehead. Close up, she could smell wet road and the sharp, sour note of illness like leaves rotting under snow. "You rode in this?" she asked, reaching for the tympanic thermometer. He said, "From east. Had to make miles." His gaze fell to her hands, steady, small scars along the index where mortar had bitten skin during compounding years ago. A crescent burn from an autoclave tray. "Rook," he added. "But my ma called me Nolan when she wanted me honest." The hint of a smile didn't survive the next cough that bent him in half. She thought pneumonia until proven otherwise. She thought dehydration, maybe exposure, probably bronchitis turned bad from stubbornness and weather. She thought of the clinic 3 blocks down, closed at 6. She thought of the hospital 12 miles away, understaffed, where patients waited on gurneys like parked cars. She thought of what was within her license and training and what was merely within her heart. "Breathe with me," she said, counting in 4s until he matched her rhythm, the way she once had with a panicked asthmatic boy whose mother sobbed into a tissue printed with tiny blue forget-me-nots. She fetched a spacer and an albuterol sample from the cupboard where she kept samples the way some people kept spare light bulbs, then coaxed him through 2 puffs, slow. The sound in his chest eased from crumpled paper to damp velvet. His shoulders dropped. "Better," he said. The word was a little bright with surprise, like a coin catching light. She was already weighing antibiotics in her mind, the cost of a chest x-ray he would avoid, the angle of the era they were stuck in, opioid audits, PBM clause dug deep into reimbursements, the way independent pharmacies bled pennies in towns where pennies were the only coin people had left. She asked about allergies, listened for the waver that meant he was guessing. Penicillin fine, sulfa fine. Last antibiotic some years back when a chain pharmacy tech had called out his address loud enough to make him feel like an invoice instead of a person. "Cash?" she asked, because she had to. She hated the way the word tasted. "Rook." Nolan wiped his mouth with a sleeve and looked at the floor. "I can get it to you," he said. Few days? Week tops? He said it like somebody prepared to be told to leave anyway. The rain sizzled on the asphalt outside. Rhea felt the small ache of a decision begin behind her breastbone and knew she was already on the other side of it. "We can't wait a week," she said. "If we wait, complicated things get more complicated, and you become a story some nurse tells me in 2 months about a man who tried to ride through pneumonia and didn't." She paused. "Let me help, and you pay me when you can." He stared at her like that sentence had never occurred in his life. She felt his hunger for relief. Physical, yes, but also the hunger for a moment where the world didn't ask him to barter the last good thing he had left, which from how he carried himself looked like dignity. "I don't want charity," he said, jaw hard. "It's not charity," she said, and let her voice be the steady surface of a pond. She smiled, small. "If it helps, you can call it an invoice with a generous due date." Something loosened in his face. He looked toward the shelves as if the bottles themselves might vote. "I won't forget," he said finally. "I won't let anyone forget." She wrote the prescription under the collaborative practice agreement with the clinic, a protocol she'd helped build over 3 years of stubborn meetings and data graphs that made doctors actually nod. Amoxicillin clavulanate for coverage, doxycycline in case the local resistance patterns were lying again. She added a steroid burst because his chest sounded like wet chords, and she could hear the beginning of that narrow music that sometimes slid into catastrophe at midnight. She printed labels, her name small at the bottom, where it always startled her. Called her, Rhea PharmD. "Sit," she told him, softer. "You look like the floor would win if you argued." She brewed tea in the staff microwave because all care is care, even when it smells like peppermint and paper cups. She slid a packet of saltines across the counter, remembering the last time she'd eaten anything longer ago than she wanted to admit. He shredded a cracker with his thick fingers as if paper could feed him, and she thought, this is a man who fixes what he can with the tools at hand and endures the rest. The register screen reflected pale blue on her face as she rang the sale at 0, a small blank box where numbers should have gone. She typed "write off" with a steadiness that felt like rebellion and printed a receipt anyway, because paper made things real. He tucked it inside his jacket as if it might keep him warm. "Take the first dose now," she said, counting out tablets into the little amber bottle like she was counting her own breaths. "Food is better, but the crackers will do. Drink water, more than you think you want. You'll feel worse before better. That's the steroids in your body doing what bodies do when they finally stop carrying weight in the dark." He looked at her hands again, then at her eyes, and I had the sudden, almost childish thought that she wished she had slept more last night so the skin under those eyes didn't show how many others she had watched and worried over. "Ma'am," he said, and the word was from another time. "Thank you." He swallowed the first tablet with tea that had cooled to the temperature of rain. He pulled his glove off and fumbled with a dog-eared wallet, the kind that carried receipts for meals he hadn't quite managed, a picture of a woman who could have been a friend or an obligation, and a single bill, a 20 so torn along one edge it looked like it had tried to escape. He held it out. His hands shook in a way he tried to hide. Rhea stared at the bill and saw all the bills she saw in that town, money that had done more than its share of work, money that should not have to buy compassion. She pushed his hand back gently. "You can bring me the first crisp bill you see when you're well. Consider it an excuse to come back in and tell me your lungs are behaving." He looked like he might argue. Then his chest made a sound that ended the possibility. He coughed into his elbow until his eyes watered, then breathed shallow, then deeper, until the air remembered its own job. The rain deepened. Somewhere in the strip mall, the donut place flicked off its sign. The laundromat kept going, steady as a heartbeat. Rhea cleaned the counter by habit, her mind making lists in the comfortable, endless way it did when the world outside threatened to be too large. She thought of ordering more nebulizer kits. She thought of calling the clinic first thing in the morning to nudge about weekend coverage. She thought of the letter on her desk at home, the one with the corporate logo that had the shine of old money and promises meant for someone else entirely. He rose as if something under him had decided. "Rook," he said again, as if names needed repetition to stick. "Nolan, if you want it. I'll be back." "You better be," she said. "I'll be here." When he left, the bell chimed again, and the stormwind shouldered the door hard enough to make the hinge crave oil. She watched him cross the lot to a bike as black as a closed eye. He swung his leg over with the measured care of a man who knew exactly how much his body could be trusted. The headlight carved a narrow world out of rain, and then he was a sound disappearing down the road like a promise she had chosen to believe. Rhea stood in the quiet after and let it find its level. The pharmacy breathed with her. The distant refrigeration units, the faint ozone smell of toner, the plastic voice of the robot that counted pills when they refused to align with mortal patients. She locked the door, because ritual mattered, and flipped the sign from "Open" to "See you tomorrow," and almost smiled at the optimism of that sentence. She did not sleep well. Storms made the roof talk, and her mind did that unkind thing where it replayed the way a man's chest had sounded and lined up worst-case scenarios as if worry could serve as a cure. She got up at 3 to make lists she already knew by heart. In the morning, the world wore a film of silt-colored light that made it look like a memory of itself. She parked behind the pharmacy and carried in a flat of bottled water, like a woman moving bricks to build a small wall against the next fire. By 9, the morning had the rhythm she cherished. Mr. Templeton came for his warfarin and told her the weather hurt his left knee, which always predicted rain as accurately as a sailor. Zara from the fruit market brought oranges with leaves still attached and scolded Rhea for working too hard in the voice of a cousin. A teacher called to ask if the school could send over a box of EpiPens for training. Rhea said yes, because saying yes to the right things had become her liturgy. At 10:30, the mail brought the letter with the corporate logo again, the one from Vantage Care Pharmacy Holdings, embossed, heavy, pretending to be generous. The language was oil-slick polite. They congratulated her on keeping an independent alive in a changing reimbursement environment. They would love to help her transition. The number at the bottom of the page was big enough to make anyone with a mortgage skip a breath. The margin notes Rhea had written last night still stared at her. What if I say no again? What if there's no again left to say? She set the letter beside the keyboard, where the blue of the screen washed it into a different color. She thought of the clinic 3 blocks down and the way the nurse practitioner called her by first name and meant it. She thought of Nolan's cough like the sound of fabric tearing, and the way he'd looked at her hands. She thought, I don't want to sell my people like stock. Just before noon, the door chimed and the day shifted. He wore the same black jacket, now clean of the night's road, and a scarf wrapped high that made his cheekbones look like they were carved from winter. He carried his helmet under his arm as if it were something alive. "You aren't dead," Rhea said, then flushed because it was not precisely professional. He said, "Working on the living part." He held up a brown bag from the diner next door. "Brought biscuits, gravy, something orange in a cup." "God bless all 3, she said, and meant it. He put the bag on the counter and stood back like he might spook the shelves. "How's your chest?" she asked, already reaching for the pulse ox by habit. He let her, and she watched the numbers bloom like small flowers. 95, 96. The hammer in his pulse had slowed to something closer to human. The color had come back under his skin. "Better," he said. "Like I've stopped drowning and started coughing up the ocean 1 spoon at a time." She laughed. He smiled, then straightened like he had to remember to be guarded to stay whole. He dug in the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a crumpled envelope. "Look," he said, awkward, and suddenly younger. Down payment. Not much, but more than a 20 trying to be 2. She took the envelope and felt the weight of quarters, a few bills, and something that was not money. A small, flat pin with a winged skull on it, silver, dulled by thumbprints. "I can't take this," she said, "because it did not look like a thing you gave away." "You can," he said. "It's not mine to wear anymore until I earn it back. Consider it collateral." The words carried pride and something like grief. She placed the pin on the counter gently. "I'll hold it," she said, "not take, hold. That way I have a reason to be annoyed at you until you're well enough to come demand it." He nodded, something warm at the corner of his mouth. "Fair," he said. "Also, thank you for not asking questions you looked like you can ask." "You mean the patch," she said, glancing at the small nomad bar, "and the pin." "And the bike," he said, "and the way I watched the windows." She thought of all the stories people had laid on her counter like coins. Addiction, recovery, relapse, the ways grief makes a person spend themselves wrong for years. She had learned to hold curiosity and leave judgment for the places that wore robes. "If you want to tell me, you will," she said. "If you don't, I'll still count your pills right." He exhaled, a fraction of a laugh. "You run this place like a church, only with better coffee." "Don't let Pastor Graham hear you say that," she said, and the grin came easier this time. He stayed just long enough to eat a biscuit at the end of the counter, like a man tasting the idea of normal. He told her he was headed west once his lungs stopped making thunder. He told her he used to fix things for a living, pipes, wires, people's stupid mistakes turning their stupid houses into water features. And he'd gotten tired of the way a certain kind of man said thank you like a threat. He didn't say the word club. He didn't say Hell's Angels. She didn't ask. "Take care," she said when he left, and he touched the glass of the door with his bare fingers like it was a ritual he owed the world. Afternoon slid in with its errands. A grandmother counted out nickels for lisinopril, and Rhea slid a discount across the register like a magician showing nothing up her sleeve. A college kid with a tight jaw and a plastered smile tried not to say the word anxiety, and Rhea found a way to let the word arrive without shame. At 3:15, a man in a suit the color of accountant teeth walked in and made the air feel smaller. "Miss Calder," he said, as if the name were an invoice. "I'm Mark Dwyer with Vantage Care. Did you get our letter?" He set a folder on the counter and spread it with 2 fingers, like he was showing a land deed in an old western. "I did," she said. She kept her voice low, calm, the way you keep water from seeing its own depth. "We're not selling."
Dwyer's smile stuttered. "Then you'll want to be prepared," he said, tone cooling. "There's an audit in your future. Our partners have questions. We'll be in touch." He tapped the folder, left it like a calling card, and walked out with a gait that was almost a strut. The bell chimed, innocent as ever. Her hands shook after he left, the body's old treachery. Fear speaks in biology when it can't find language. She reached for the biscuit Nolan had brought and found comfort in something that tasted like the inside of a sundae. At 5:40, right before dinner hour, 2 men walked in together, and the day took a turn she recognized from 100 tiny alarms. They had the walk of people practicing nonchalance like a second language. Hoodies under flannel, caps pulled low. The taller one looked at the cameras, the shorter one looked everywhere but at her. Their eyes moved in loops. Rhea felt her heart slide into a quieter deer. "Can I help you?" she asked, voice bright enough to be a warning with a ribbon on it. Yeah," the taller one said. "Looking for hydros." He said it wrong on purpose, like a man trying on a code he didn't earn. "My grandma's prescription got messed up at the hospital." "The ER doesn't call those in," Rhea said gently, because being right without kindness had never saved anyone. If your grandmother's in pain, we can call her doctor to adjust or recommend other options. Don't need other options, he said, the underlip pushing forward like a kid denied candy. The shorter one drifted down aisle 3, where the cameras angled weren't great. He picked up a bottle of cough syrup, turned it in his hands like a man imagining the taste of a bad idea, set it down again. Rhea smiled the way a woman smiles when she's already measured the distance to the panic button with her peripheral vision. We keep a good log, she said, conversational. Cameras, too. She let the sentence sit on the counter between them like a small glass snake. They didn't buy anything. They left smelling like rain and impatience. She watched them cross the lot to a car with a dent like a punch in the rear quarter panel and wrote down the plate number on the edge of the receipt paper and stuck it under the keyboard with a piece of blue tape. She had learned long ago that memory is brave and paper is loyal. The sun, such as it was, sank into a pan of tin-colored clouds. Rhea flipped the sign to closed at 7 and worked through the quiet tasks that made mornings smoother. Counting controls twice by habit, checking fridge temperatures, sticking her hand into the bin of donated mittens, and feeling the little soft army ready for winter. She was carrying the trash out the back when the hair at the base of her skull prickled. The alley behind the pharmacy was narrow, lined with the backs of businesses that showed their real faces to dumpsters and stray cats. She caught movement at the edge of her vision, a man she didn't recognize, standing just beyond the light, looking not at her but at the security camera, as if memorizing it. He had the stillness of a river right before it makes a bad decision. "Can I help you?" she called, holding the trash bag like a ridiculous black flag. Her voice made a decent attempt at casual. He didn't answer. He smiled instead, and the smile was a hook. He turned and walked away slow, as if granting her this one small thing so she'd owe him the next. She locked the back door and leaned her forehead against the cool metal for a second longer than made sense. She tasted copper at the back of her tongue, adrenaline, and the memory of running from boys who thought fear was a game. That night, she dreamed of aisles with no end, labels all turned to languages she didn't read, the hum of refrigerators rising to a swarm. She woke at 4 with the sense that someone had said her name. She answered it with coffee and resolve. When she got in early, a note waited under the door, slid half the way in like a threat practicing sincerity. The handwriting was precise and careful, the kind of careful that makes its own menace. "We know what you keep in the back," it read. "Don't make us look for it." A phone number trailed down like ivy. Rhea stood very still. Behind her, the refrigerators hummed like distant bees. She folded the note once, twice, again, until it was a square that could fit inside her palm without edges. Then she put it in a plastic bag and labeled it with the date in the clean, tidy handwriting that had gotten her teased in middle school for being somebody's grandma 15 years too soon. The clinic opened at 8. She called the nurse practitioner, told her just enough, and they agreed on extra caution. No early refills on the hard stuff. Nobody complaining chronic pain would be asked for PDMP checks, the sort of professional choreography that kept them between compassion and custody. She called the police and filed a report, the kind that would marinate in a drawer until something worse made it part of a folder. At 9:30, the bell chimed and the air moved differently. Leather, rain-dried to a salt map on a jacket. Rook stood just inside the door, took one look at her face, and knew more than most. "What happened?" he asked. The question did not fish for drama. It offered a tool. She told him in the efficient, stripped sentences of a person who respects both time and truth. The note, the men, the way the alley had felt like a throat. His jaw worked. His gaze flicked to the cameras, the corners, the angles you see when you've been in rooms where people wanted to control what the room saw. "Don't want to scare you," he said, "but there's a crew in towns like this that knocks over pharmacies to feed a pipeline. They aren't users, they're delivery men. They push on the places that care because the places that don't already sold them the shelves." He stopped, the muscles in his cheek jumping like startled fish. "I'll ask around." "I called the police," she said, feeling suddenly naive, like a person mistaking a bandage for a bone. "That's good," he said, and both of them heard the hollow in the word. "But these guys aren't afraid of paper." He hesitated, then added, "There's another way." Revea felt the reflexive bristle. "I can't hire a guard who makes the neighbors call the mayor," she said. "I can't turn this place into a checkpoint. People come here sick and scared. It has to feel like a kitchen, not a courthouse." Rook's mouth twitched. "I wasn't offering to stand in the aisle and scare grandmas," he said wryly. "But there are folks who owe me listening, and there are folks who listen even if they don't owe. I can make sure word gets out that this place is not to be touched." "Word from who?" she asked. She was a pharmacist. She believed in names and doses and interactions that made chemical sense. He looked at her for a long second, the way a man checks a bridge before driving 200 miles out of his way to cross it. He said finally, "From people who don't like thieves, from people who believe in a certain kind of line. I'll put it plain. I can ask my club to keep eyes on you." He watched her absorb club and did not say the name, but it hung between them like engine heat. "I don't want trouble," she said, aware of how small the word want sounded against something that moved with thunder. "You already have trouble," he said, voice gentle, the kind that pretends it's small until it breaks a window. He gestured to the aisles. "You run a kitchen. Good. Let me make sure nobody kicks the door in while you're stirring the soup." She looked at his jacket, the patch he wore like a confession, the pin she kept in the drawer like a promise. She thought of the note folded in the plastic bag with the date. She thought of Vantage Care and its smile like a blade. She thought of how an oath can go bad and how a code can save a life. "If you do this," she said, choosing her words the way you choose a dose, "nobody gets hurt in my name. Not a kid, not a cop, not some guy who made a bad decision 3 months in a row and finally believes he can make a good one. If your people stand outside and growl, okay. If they come inside and bite, no." Rook nodded once, slow, like a man accepting terms he would have offered first if he thought he had the right. "Understood. Give me a day." He left, and by noon the town had learned how rumors move on days when the sky sits low. Zara came by with extra oranges and a frown shaped like a lantern. Mr. Templeton brought her a newspaper clipping about a man who'd lived to 97 by eating bacon twice a week and claimed it as medical proof. A teenage boy tried to buy syringes with a lie that told on itself. Revea sold him a Sharps container instead, and a brochure, and the look that says, "I see you, and I hope you choose better next time." At 2, a text came from an unknown number. "Tell your backlot camera to meet the 21st century." He included a grainy still of the man from the alley and an arrow pointing to the camera mount. Another text a minute later, "Don't stay late tonight." "Bossy," she muttered at the phone, but felt the warmth of being inside someone's concern. She did not stay late. At 6:30, she counted the controls again because ritual is a spine when fear is cartilage. She set the pen in the drawer on top of the bank bag like a talisman that understood both debt and honor. She locked the register, flipped the sign, turned, and found herself eye to eye with the taller man from yesterday, his cap lower, his jaw tighter, his impatience grown teeth. The shorter man stood behind him, restless, a shape that looked like a question with a switchblade inside it. "We're closed," she said, "because you still say the thing even when it's ridiculous." "Yeah," the taller one said, "I bet you are." He lifted his hoodie just high enough to show the steel hook of a gun script. "Open the back. We'll make it quick." Revea felt everything slow down the way it does when the body tries to make time armor. She could hear the refrigerators. She could hear her own breath. She could hear just faintly something else beyond the glass of the front door, a sound like weather that had learned to move on 2 wheels. "Gentlemen," she said, and was surprised at her own voice, level, almost bored. "You picked the wrong kitchen." The taller man smiled with half his face. "Open the back," he repeated, "now." And then the first engine thundered, close, then closer, the sound stacking on itself until it wasn't sound anymore, but a presence, a wall of vibration that turned the door glass into a drum. Headlights, dozens, then more, seared through the storm dark like a rolling sunrise. The parking lot filled with the roar and strobe of chrome and will, as if the weather itself had chosen a side. The taller man's smile broke, like a plate edged off a counter. The shorter one swore, a small, brittle noise. Revea felt the counter against the backs of her knees. She held her breath without meaning to, not sure if the next second would bring a miracle or a crucible. The bell above the door trembled with the pressure of all that thunder. Hands, gloved, deliberate, reached for the handle from the outside and turned it.
This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. And turned it. The latch gave that polite click doors make before choosing a side, and the glass swung wide to the night like a held breath let go. Rhea didn't move. She watched in the milky reflection a shape filled the doorway. Leather, rain dark, patience wrapped around bone. And then another and another, until the threshold felt like a river mouth where all upstream currents poured through. The taller man with the gun hissed between his teeth. What the? Rhea's brain didn't file the curse. It logged the gun hand, the angle, the distance to the panic button, the fact that the bell chimed as if this were still a cheerful errand in a small town instead of the moment a door decided whether it was a wall. First in was Nolan. He moved with the slow economy of a man who had already chosen what he would do and didn't need to sell it to anyone. He stepped to one side so the second rider could take the opposite flank, so the third could turn and hold the door with the gloved hand that kept it from banging against its hinges. The smell of rain and hot metal rolled in like weather remembering its job. Behind them, headlamps painted the lot in shards of white, chrome flashing like a language Rhea couldn't read but understood was fluent. Engines idled, a thunder that didn't demand attention so much as established a border and said, "We are holding it." "Stores closed," Nolan said to the taller man, voice quiet as gravel underwater. "Leave the lady be." He didn't look at the gun like he feared it. He looked at it like a mechanic looks at a faulty part he intended to replace. The shorter man swore again, louder, the kind of sound a person makes when they realize their plan has to move from first grade to graduate school with no study time. His fingers twitched near the shape under his hoodie. Rhea's heart tapped her ribs in a rhythm that wanted to be Morse code. "Don't," Nolan said. Not loud, not theatrical, just a word laid down like a plank between two cliffs. The second rider reached inside his jacket, and Rhea felt the world tilt until he produced only a phone. He took a picture of the two men with the casualness of a tourist collecting a sunset, and then another of the license plate through the glass. The third rider, older, gray in his beard, eyes thoughtful like a coach, turned and gave a small signal with two fingers toward the lot. The thunder spread, two lines of bikes moving to either end of the strip mall, so the lot became something like a shepherded field. "Look, man," the taller one said in a voice that tried on bravado like an ill-fitting jacket. "We don't want trouble." "Then don't rehearse it in her aisle," Nolan said. He let his gaze flick past them to Rhea. She saw a question there, plain and respectful as a hand extended to help someone stand. "Your call." Rhea swallowed a very dry mouth and found her yes without searching long. "You heard the man," she said to the would-be thieves, surprised at the evenness of her tone. "Take your practice elsewhere." It wasn't a taunt. It was a diagnosis.
Behind Nolan, more leather and rain and patience.
Rhea couldn't see the lot clearly through glare, but she could see shapes. Bikes lined in rows like a presentation, riders standing beside them with their helmets off as if this were a memorial and not a standoff. Patches, some with wings, some with script, some with cities she knew only from shipping labels, caught the light and threw it back. There were many, too many to count quickly. The air felt shaped by them. The shorter man broke first. He shoved the taller one's elbow. "Screw this," he muttered. The taller one held Nolan's eyes a beat longer and found nothing he could use. He backed toward the door sideways, as men with guns are trained to do when siding with caution. Nolan did not step forward. He did not need to. The riders to either side of the door made a small corridor of weather and expectation. The two men went through it and into a parking lot that was no longer neutral ground. Out in the rain-glossed dark, engines raised their tone for a breath, just enough to remind soft hearts that thunder has cousins. The dented car turned over and left with the particular urgency of someone who has recognized a cliff where they thought there was a curb. Nolan let out a breath. The second rider pocketed his phone. The third finally released the door, letting it ease shut with a chime that sounded almost like laughter. The pharmacy was quiet again, except for the refrigeration hum and the communicated presence of 200-and-something men who had decided that a kitchen was to be respected. Rhea's legs remembered to be legs and not pylons. She came out from behind the counter because staying behind it felt like apologizing. Nolan's eyes scanned her face, checking for cracks. "You all right?" he asked. She let herself inventory. Heart racing, but not wild. Hands steady. The taste of metal fading. The memory of the note still in the drawer like a tooth kept in a velvet box as a reminder. "I am," she said. "Thank you for all of that." She gestured toward the door, the lot, and the echoing fact of it. He nodded once, as if accepting gratitude like a person accepts a cup of water handed at a long run. "You said nobody gets hurt in your name. That's still the rule. We'll keep it." The gray-bearded rider stepped forward and tipped his chin the way people used to tip hats. "Ma'am," he said, "name's Harris. Some call me Reader. I coordinate when the young ones want to treat a situation like a race." His smile was small and apologetic for the thunder in the lot. "We'll stage outside until closing, quiet, like scarecrows for wolves." Rhea blinked up at him and tried to picture the right words to fit this surreal kindness into the language she used for inventory and prior auths and side effects. "I appreciate you," she said, which wasn't enough and would have to be for now. Nolan turned half toward the door. "We're not in your way. We're something in front of your way so you can see it better." He said it like he knew it sounded odd and true at once. She found the ghost of a laugh. "It's a good view. Obstructed parking, excellent security." He almost smiled. "It's close as you can get to an angel in a leather jacket." Then he winced. "That's a joke we don't make often, because God has a sense of humor and lightning." The door opened again, politely, as if all that thunder outside had a good mother who taught it manners. A woman in a denim jacket with a red bandana knotted at her throat stepped in carrying a cardboard tray of coffees and a brown paper sack that folded at the top like a gift. She had the bearing of someone who had led parades and first aid triage both. "For the lady," she said, placing the coffees on the counter. "And for your crew if you're short on blood sugar." She jerked her head toward the lot. "They're saying 200 by now." She flicked her eyes to Nolan, counting ours and the boys who were already on the road. 200? Rhea repeated, the numbers sounding like a fairy tale told by motorcycles.
"Heading toward 3, the woman said. "Word spreads fast when it matters." She stuck out her hand. "I'm Quinn. Don't let the bandana fool you. I will absolutely put a biker twice my size in timeout if he forgets his manners around a pharmacy." Rhea shook her hand and felt something in her chest loosen that hadn't since the note slid under the door. "I only have 3 chairs," she said, because humor was a way to keep the room from tipping. "Timeouts will have to be staggered." Quinn grinned. "We'll bring our own milk crates." She turned to Nolan. Red and I are setting up cones so the lot doesn't become a parking free-for-all. Readers got the list of the faces we don't want near the door. You want me to text the sheriff's office with the courtesy heads up? Nolan glanced at Rhea, and she nodded. Please, she said. I don't want them rolling up thinking this is a siege. Quinn's thumbs flew. Already on it, she said. Dispatch says thank you, and also can you please not block Mrs. Wang's donut shop because she will call the governor. We will not block Mrs. Wang, Reader said gravely, like a man who had eaten her glazed twists and understood sacred things. The first hour after that felt like the way evenings feel in towns after a storm, charged and careful. People peeking at damage, everybody out on porches speaking softer because the sky has spoken loudly. Riders who would never have been customers still came in to buy throat lozenges and hand sanitizer and gum, small gestures meant to turn presents into commerce so it didn't feel like invasion. The bell chimed and chimed. Some of the older men took off their gloves before shaking Rhea's hand. Some of the younger ones hovered near the displays about vaccination like they wanted to read and didn't want to be seen reading. Reader restocked the free little jar of stickers at the counter 3 times because grown men kept taking one for a kid at home or a dashboard or helmet where a serious person could pretend a dinosaur sticker was ironic. At 8:30, Rhea finally breathed in a way that reached her toes. Nolan stood near the end cap that held canes and ankle braces, watching the door with a posture that looked like rest to anyone who didn't know better. She walked over so she didn't have to raise her voice. I don't know how to say this without sounding like a greeting card, she said. Thank you. He shrugged, the motion barely there. You gave me air when I couldn't find enough on my own. We're even in one ledger and uneven in another. I prefer the second ledger. Gives me a reason to show up. She was quiet a second, catching the truth of that in the softest part of her chest. Is this safe for you? She asked. For your people? He followed her gaze to the patch on his chest, to the watching windows. Safe is a relative word. We make it safer where we can. There's a line in our world about kids, hospitals, and places that keep people alive. You don't touch them. You help them. Anybody who doesn't get that doesn't ride with us long. He tilted his head. You asked for no one to get hurt. We heard you. Rhea nodded, then looked toward the lot. Engines idled lower now. Men leaned against bikes talking like neighbors at a fire break. She imagined the 2 would-be thieves trying to explain their night to whoever had sent them. She wondered if the note in the drawer would have a sequel. Closing took forever and, also, no time at all. Reader and Quinn walked a lot perimeter while Rhea counted and signed. Nolan stayed 30 feet from the door and somehow might as well have been a wall of basalt. When she finally flipped the sign, the riders didn't cheer. They did something quieter, but more moving. They stood up, climbed on, and brought engines to life one by one like candles catching. They filed out 2 by 2, leaving spaces between for nothing but rain. Nolan didn't move until the last taillight bowed to the dark. I'll be back before open, he said. You don't have to, she said, and knew that it was both true and false. Maybe I want to. He said, Doctor says walk when you can. I hear engines count.
She locked the door. He waited until she was in her car and her headlights swept the lot. He put up 2 fingers in a small salute, then rolled away into the kind of night that makes a person think there are giants again. The next morning, the town behaved like towns behave when something astonishing happened that didn't ask for applause. Zara, from the fruit market, handed Rhea a bag of dates and said nothing except for energy. Mrs. Wang sent over a paper sack of still-warm donut holes and a note, for your friends who did not block my parking. Mr. Templeton reported that the older men had stood up straighter than deacons when he walked between rows of bikes, and that one of them had called him sir and meant it. The police came by mid-morning. Officer Lyle, who had once fainted in Rhea's consult room after a flu shot, bless him, stood awkwardly near the magazine rack while his partner, a woman with a braid that meant business, asked practical questions about last night. Rhea told them about the note, the men, the license plates she'd written down. She did not speak for the riders. She didn't have to. Quinn had already briefed dispatch with bullet points that read like a PTA update. Community presence, no altercations, cameras upgraded, Parking cones returned to Mrs. Wang. "You good with them out there?" the braided officer asked finally, not judgmental, just mapping territory. "They make people who want to do harm feel watched," Rhea said. "They make the rest feel safe. Until this comes down, I'm not turning away help that comes with rules and coffee." "Copy that," the officer said, and slipped a card under the till with her direct line. "If anything looks wrong, call me. I won't send a parade." By noon, the number had settled out. 280. That's what Quinn said, finally, after a head count across chapters and the ones who rolled in at dawn from as far as Amarillo because they saw a message that said a pharmacist had stood up for someone and now thieves were pushing, and how about we stand up for the pharmacist? 280 was a number that looked ridiculous next to a strip mall with a donut shop and a laundromat. It looked like myth parked against a sidewalk chalked with hopscotch. They didn't all stay, of course. Men had jobs and dogs and obligations that didn't care that the sky had been split by a story. But they rotated in, 3 and 5 and 12 at a time, a genome of presence that said, "Not here, not this one, not while you're watched." Rhea adjusted quicker than she would have guessed to the low thrum at the edge of hearing, to the leather shadows drifting past the front windows like migrating clouds. She learned names, Reader and Quinn, and Wren and Biscuit and Iceman, and a young mechanic named Adrian who blushed when she caught him reading the vaccine brochure, then went outside and asked his club brother in Spanish whether tetanus really had anything to do with rusty nails or if that was just a story abuelas told to keep kids from playing in sheds. It did, sorta. She drew him a diagram with a Sharpie and watched him show it to 2 men who nodded solemnly like she had handed them treasure. The town learned too. Mothers came in with children on hips and waved through the glass at the men who tipped chins back respectfully. An old man in a Vietnam hat traded stories with Reader on the sidewalk and later came in to ask Rhea whether it was normal to feel okay and still cry in the cereal aisle. She told him yes, and rang up his Raisin Bran and slipped in a pharmacy-made handout about grief groups like it was a bookmark in a life he had put down too long. There were rough edges. One afternoon, a young rider with shoulders that thought they were a shield spoke too sharply to a man who looked like he had not slept in 3 days. Quinn took the young rider aside, and Rhea watched, fascinated, as the woman's mouth moved with calm force until the boy looked smaller and then finally right-sized. He came in 10 minutes later and apologized to Rhea, although she hadn't been the one he'd spoken harshly to. He bought a pack of gum he didn't want to buy and said he was learning. She believed him. Vantage Care's man came back on the 3rd day. He found the cone line and looked at it like he'd found a dress code at a nightclub he didn't want to go to anyway. He walked in with the kind of smile people put on to sell something to a person's grief. "Miss Calder," he said, carefully not glancing at the riders outside, "I see you've enlisted security." "Community," Rhea said. "They like coffee." He pursed his mouth into what some people might mistake for a sympathetic expression. "The audit team will be here Friday," he said, placing a stack of papers on the counter. "With or without your cooperation." "Then they can have a donut hole and a cordial greeting like everyone else," Rhea said. "I have nothing to hide." She had known this was coming. She had spent nights combing records until the rows of numbers felt like prayer beads, checking dates and signatures and inventory counts against a ledger that meant she could sleep. "The world is changing," he said softly, as if reciting a benediction. "It's hard for small independents to—" "We both know what's hard," she said, and kept her voice gentle because she wasn't angry at Mark Dwyer. She was angry at a system that turned care into points shaved from margins until nothing remained but the corner where you cut. It's also hard to count out somebody's last inhaler sample because the PBM clawed back what we made on the first 2. It's hard to explain to a mother why her child's medication costs more this month than last, when neither the drug nor her child changed. We're doing hard things here. You can either let us do them, or you can get out of the way." Something in Dwyer's expression flickered, an honest flash of weariness under the shell of his job. Then it shuddered.
He left the papers. He left. Period. The bell chimed behind him with squeaky innocence. Outside, Nolan watched him go with a gaze that Rhea, if pressed, would have called surgical. Friday arrived with rain and an audit team and black umbrellas. They behaved like people who were sure they would find something, and Rhea behaved like a woman who had spent years living as if today would be the day someone asked whether she had done it right, and she could answer with yes. She supported her texts without throwing them into the mouth of a machine. She answered questions with dates and documentation and the calm of a math teacher who knows where every number goes. At one point, an auditor asked about the zeroed-out sale that had Nolan's initials beside it, labeled write-off, the paper that had made care real. The patient was in respiratory distress and unable to pay that night. The clinic agreement allows a pharmacist-initiated course for suspected lower respiratory infection when certain criteria are met. They were met. "And the payment?" the auditor asked, clicking a pen. "Arranged," Rhea said. She did not mention the winged skull pin in the drawer. "You're welcome to note that I fed a man crackers and tea I did not bill for." The auditor tried not to smile, failed. "Duly noted," she said. By afternoon, the umbrellas turned into damp birds leaving a field. The lead auditor shook Rhea's hand, warmer than she had expected, and said the words independent pharmacists sleep to. "We'll be in touch." Rhea leaned against the break room counter after they left and felt her spine take stock. Quinn appeared with a thermos. "Drink," she commanded. "We nearly staged a parade to keep the auditors from double parking." "Thank you for restraining yourselves," Rhea said into the cup. "They were curious," Quinn said, eyes sparking. "We told them curiosity is fine, but courtesy is law." The note returned on the fourth night. Slid under the door again, the same precise hand, the same careful menace. "We warned you. Tomorrow. Back door. Bring the safe cash. No cops. No bikers." Rhea read the note in that thin space between breath and pulse where fear leaves instructions you either follow or you write your own. She put the note in another plastic bag. She called the braided officer. She called Quinn. She did not call Nolan because he was already there, a shape outside the window like a sentinel the weather had carved. "We want to control this, not escalate it," the officer said. "Agreed," Rhea said. "No one gets hurt in my name."
They built a plan with the fragile tools towns use when a storm promises to return. More lights in the alley, a car across the lot that looked like a drunk parking job but wasn't, 2 officers on foot out of sight, and riders who knew how to make a lot look empty when it was not. Reader assigned 3 men to the roofline like gargoyles with radios. Quinn placed a folding table by the back door as if it were for a bake sale and not a boundary line. Nolan checked the hinges. Rhea counted the controls again and put the bank bag in a place thieves never looked because it didn't make sense to steal. Behind the antacids and 3 boxes down, a V of shelf-talkers hiding a simple genius no one in a hurry would find. Then she stood where she always stood when the day came to its glass bell close, behind the counter, hands on the laminate, body of fact. The men came just after 9, but the night had been waiting since noon. They were not the same 2. These were older, flat-eyed, carrying duffel calm like church. The taller one knocked on the back door as if he had come to borrow a cup of sugar. "We know you're back there," he called conversationally. "Don't be a hero. Open up." Rhea didn't move. She heard the click of the radio near her ear. Rita's voice, low. 3, maybe 4. Alley, north end. 2 more holding by the dumpster. Police 2 minutes out. Steady. The knock came again. "Last chance," the voice said. Nolan stepped from the dark into the outer pool of the security light. He didn't speak. He just put one hand on the doorframe and stood there like a coat rack built for holding weather. Behind him, farther out, 2 shapes peeled from shadow and took positions that made the alley feel like a funnel with its wide end pointed towards the street. "We said no bikers," the man called. Rhea heard the flex it took to make his voice carry without wobble. "You don't get to say," Nolan replied, calm. "You write notes. We write code."
The taller man laughed, short and humorless. "You gonna quote scripture at me, preacher?" "No scripture," Nolan said. "Just a line. You don't cross it." The man moved, the kind of movement people make when they had already decided to win by speed. Rhea barely saw the gun before she saw the laser dot. An officer, somewhere, a bead of red finding a shoulder. Nolan lifted his open hand. "Not in her name," he said, and something in the air shifted like a flock turning. Behind the tall one of his men saw what the rest could not: the roofline shadows, the angles of the alley, the way the funnel would make running a bad option. "Nah," that man said, and it wasn't to his boss. It was to the night or to the turn in his life that had led him to this very place. He set his bag down. He stepped back, palms up. "I ain't catching a case over pills we can get in any other county," he muttered. He found the edges of the light and backed into the dark. The tall man cursed him, cursed Nolan, cursed paper and rides and a woman who wouldn't open a door when threatened. He took one more step and found the red dot on his wrist, pulsing with the rhythm of someone else's heartbeat. He froze. The braided officer's voice came from the shadows. "Hands where I can see 'em." The shape of another officer materialized near the dumpster like a magician revealing a trick that saved lives. It was clean for what it could have been. The gun hit the concrete, the duffel followed. The other two ran, and the alley's funnel performed as designed, emptying them into a wall of engines and a patrol car's sudden blue that turned the alley into a thought about decisions and their children. After, there was paperwork, because there is always paperwork. The braided officer thanked Reader and Quinn and did not write their names in a book because she did not want to make them paperwork too. The tall man glared at Rhea from the back of the cruiser like a boy caught stealing from a church collection plate who didn't know if he was ashamed or just angry at being bad at it. He asked through the glass when the officer wasn't looking, and the word wasn't "Why did you fight?" It was "Why did all this happen for this place?" Rhea stepped close so he could hear without her raising her voice. "Because people are not inventory, because this counter is where folks come to say the things they're embarrassed to say elsewhere, because the medicine you wanted to steal has names attached to it in this town: Nick and Zara and Mr. Templeton and the kid who can finally breathe enough to sleep. You don't get to steal their sleep." He looked away. That was his answer, or he didn't have one yet. The riders drifted off into the night like rain leaving a roofline and beads. Rita touched two fingers to the brim of a cap he hadn't worn in 20 years. Quinn hugged Rhea in that firm way women hug when they're making sure the other woman is still anchored. Nolan stayed until the alley smelt like air again instead of adrenaline. When it was just the hum of the refrigerators and the buzz of a truly terrible fluorescent bulb that Rhea had learned to ignore, she turned to Nolan and realized her hands were shaking. He saw it. He stepped back as if distance could extinguish the impulse to reach out. She surprised them both by stepping forward, by taking his hand with the frankness she filed under gratitude so she didn't have to file it under anything more dangerous. His hand was warm and calloused and careful. "I have your pen," she said, voice thin with the receding tide of fear, "and a receipt with 2 numbers written on it that pretend to add up to what you did."
"You owe me nothing," he said. "We owe you a place to stand when the wind comes sideways." She let go of his hand. It left a print on her palm, a heat, a memory of a choice. "You kept your side of the rule," she said. "No one got hurt." He nodded once and looked at the roofline. "Rules keep us from becoming the men who need rules," he said. "Always have." The days that followed were not easy, and they were not quiet, but they were no longer haunted by the idea that the next knock would be yes or else. The riders reduced in number, then returned in swells when rumors rose like summer flies. 2 guys in a pickup, who had never liked bikes in numbers, changed their minds when a flat on County Road B was remedied by 3 strangers in a patch kit. Mrs. Wang brought an entire sheet cake to the lot one Saturday and insisted on cutting it herself, telling men with tattoos to hold their plates steady. Dwyer's audit letter came back with a stamp that nearly said the words Rio wanted: compliant. No major findings. Minor documentation errors corrected on site. It wasn't a parade. It was not bad,
and not bad felt like a metal on her tongue. Vantage Care tried again with a softer voice and a bigger number. Rhea looked at the letter as if it were a test of faith and smiled without humor. She wrote back, "Thank you for your interest in buying my front porch. We will be keeping it." Nolan never gave back the 20 because Rhea never took it. He brought fresh money instead, the crisp kind he had promised, slid it under the till with the casual grace of a man paying a debt in a world that kept trying to turn everything into debt. Rhea returned the pin. He held it a long time like a person holds a coin from a place they thought they'd never see again. He didn't put it on. He put it away. "Earning back is better than getting back," he said, and she understood he wasn't talking about the pin anymore. There were quieter moments Rhea knew she would remember, after the thunder moved on. Readers sitting with Mr. Templeton in the chairs next to the blood pressure cuff, both men listening to the shared silence of knees that had known weather. Quinn helping a mother with a double stroller wrangle a door, and then staying to show the 8-year-old how to place a Band-Aid so it didn't crease at the edges. Nolan showing a teenage boy how to breathe through a nebulizer like a boxer between rounds, counting with him, convincing air to stay. And there was the night the town made a choice. The city council called an emergency meeting to discuss the motorcycle situation, as if bikes were a weather pattern you could legislate into sunshine. Some wanted to pass an ordinance about loitering, about parking, about noise. Others spoke with the fear that grows in people when they imagine instead of observe. Rhea went because kitchens should show up when councils try to redesign the house. She waited until the floor opened for residents. She stood and did not clear her throat because the words had been building for days. "I run the pharmacy on Willow. If you've ever been sick in this town, you probably own a bottle with my label on it. If you've ever had to confess fear at a counter where someone tallied it and passed back something that helped, that was probably my counter. These last weeks, we had a problem. People who make money off other people's pain decided to make money off ours. They measured us wrong. They forgot that the medicine on our shelves has names and addresses attached to it. It has grandmothers and babies and men who got up at dawn to go to jobs and needed to breathe to do them. They assumed a door could be kicked. It couldn't." She paused. People were listening the way people listen to weather reports. Those bikes you hear, those engines, were not noise. They were the sound of a promise being kept by people who remember what it's like to need somebody to stand outside a door so you can do your work inside it. She let her gaze settle on the counselors. "If you pass a rule that says my friends can't stand in a lot and drink coffee and nod at grandmas, then you better show up yourselves with thermoses and patience and the kind of shoulders that can make thieves decide a different town looks like a better night. If you won't do that, don't you dare make it illegal for people who will." Silence held then, an important kind. Mrs. Wang clapped once. It turned into more. It wasn't thunder. It was rain on a roof, steady and kind. The ordinance died on the vine, tabled, which in town speak sometimes means never again. Summer folded into the corner where small towns keep their stashed good weather, and the lot emptied of riders except for a few who had tile jobs or spouses or reasons. Nolan stayed longer than most, not every day. Roads had a way of asking favors, but often enough that Rhea's mornings had a pattern that brought comfort. Count pills, greet Nolan, pretend the coffee Quinn had smuggled in didn't taste better because it was contraband. He would stand with his back to the end cap of Cane's, listening to the door, sometimes saying nothing at all. The quiet near him felt like a deliberate choice instead of absence. One evening, when the light over the prairie did that pale gold thing that makes even parking lots look like paintings, Nolan walked in with no jacket, shirt sleeves rolled, scars like maps. Rhea had just closed the register. He put his helmet on the counter and looked at it as if it were a clock. "Time to move," he said. She nodded slowly. The word landed the way autumn's first chill lands on a warm day. "West?" she asked. "Eventually. South first. A brother's kid is graduating. I want to see him take off a cap and look confused about where to put it." He smiled. Small. It did something to the room's gravity. "My lungs are not a scandal anymore. Your kindness did that."
"You did it when you took the medicine," she said, "because credit works like medicine too, and when you slept."
He reached in his pocket and placed something on the counter between them. A patch. Not the winged skull, not any color that stirred up phones and rumor. A simple piece of cloth with a road stitched in gray thread wandering across black. "For your board," he said. She had a bulletin board where she pinned little life receipts, kids' thank you drawings, a postcard that had once made it to the pharmacy by being addressed simply to "the woman who knows what to do with my pills." "We were here," the patch said, without words. "You are not alone." Rhea touched it with a fingertip, like a person touching water to test temperature. "I'll put it where the light hits in the morning," she said, "so people know care comes in a lot of uniforms." He put his hand on the counter, palm flat. "I kept something in a drawer that belonged to me," he said. "I'd like you to keep something else." He reached into the other pocket and drew out the pin, the winged skull. She blinked. "I gave that back," she said, almost laughing. "You did," he said. "I'm giving it to you, not to keep forever, to hold when nights go loud and letters go slick, and men like Dwyer try to make you sell the front porch again. Hold it. Remember that 280 men found your door worth standing in front of. Give it back when you don't need the reminder." She stared at the pin and felt that ache behind the breastbone, the one that had first flared when a man walked into her pharmacy coughing and more alone than made sense. "I'll hold it," she said. She did not pretend to be made of iron. She put the pin in the drawer on top of the bank bag. It was a ridiculous altar. It would do. "Ride safe," she added, and her voice failed just enough that he looked up quickly and then away, as if privacy were a courtesy you gave tears in a pharmacy. He tapped the counter twice with open fingers, goodbye in a language that never needed to cross the lips. Then he picked up his helmet, and the door chimed, and the evening air bowed a little to let him through. The lot looked suddenly too big. That happens when a particular shape leaves it. Rhea closed. She turned off lights in the order she always did so that the dark arrived like a friend instead of a stranger. She locked the door and pressed her forehead to the cool glass for a second, because some rituals are as much body as belief. Then she walked out into the heat-clearing evening and found the town the way she liked it best, breathing. People kept coming. They always do when a place earns their feet. The woman with migraines who had once thought she was weak and now knew she was carrying a disease. The man trying to stop drinking, who bought peppermints by the bag because his hands needed something to hold. A high school kid who called her Doc in a way that made her blush and then cherish the title the way a person cherishes a nickname they will never ask for. Vantage Care sent one last letter in winter, when the cold made breath smoke and resolve brittle. Rhea put it on the counter and set the winged skull pin on top. She took a picture and sent it to Quinn with the caption, "Altar." Quinn replied with a photo of 3 bikes in the lot and the caption, "Choir." On a Tuesday that smelled like wet wool, 2 men walked in who looked like the first 2, like the second wave, like all the men who imagined that a door was a thing that did not have a soul on the other side. They took 2 steps and then stopped because a sound from outside stopped them. The low hum of engines, not loud, not threatening, just present. The men turned without speaking and left. The bell chimed cheerfully. Rhea laughed, unexpectedly and bright. Sometimes prevention is an engine at idle. She would think, much later, about how the story had begun with a man who couldn't find air and a woman who kept spare inhalers like other people kept spare light bulbs. She would think about how it had bent toward something grander than her counter, yet it had always returned to it. She would think about rules and lines and codes and how people who carried thunder had stood in rain for a kitchen. On the 1-year mark, Nolan sent a postcard from a town whose name sounded like a guitar riff. It had a picture of a long strip of highway peeling toward mountains that looked like sleeking animals. On the back, his handwriting was neat in a way that did not match his gloves. "Still breathing," it said. "Keep the porch light on." He didn't sign it. He didn't need to. Rhea pinned the card under the patch with the gray road. The morning light hit it as promised. People noticed. They said things like, "I remember that night, and I heard about those bikes, and weird how safe that felt." Rhea smiled and rang up vitamins and counted out pills and told people to drink water and to forgive themselves and to call her if the side effects made the world tilt. She stood in her kitchen and stirred. Sometimes, late, when the lot was empty and the moon made the world look like it had been erased and redrawn cleaner, she would think she heard it, the faintest distant roll, thunder far off, engines like bees slow dancing on a hot day. She would feel her shoulders drop. She would set the winged skull pin on the counter just for a minute and remember that rules and kindness can be armor if you wear them long enough and borrow courage from anyone who will lend it. On a spring afternoon that blew pollen through the screens like confetti, a kid with a skateboard under his arm threw her a wave and said, "Hey, Doc, you still got those free stickers?" She held out the jar. He pulled two, one for his board, one for a rider's helmet he said he had once seen outside. "For later," he said, and ran out into the sun as if the street was made for him. Rhea looked at the glass door and read the words reversed, "See you tomorrow." She believed them. They weren't a retail promise. They were a covenant. That evening she wrote a small note on the back of the Vantage Care letter before dropping it into the shred bin for a second burial. "Not for sale," she wrote. And then below it, just because she liked how ink looked firm on paper, she wrote the number 280, not as a trophy, as a reminder of what a town can look like when people decide a kitchen is worth guarding, and a life is worth breath, and a door is a holy thing.